Stephanie Shirley. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. Just to give the audience a little bit of context, I'll be reading little bits of your fantastic book, Let It Go. Read it cover to cover, absolutely love it. So that's kind of the basis of what we'll be talking about today. But we've got to start. Obviously, we'll get into growing your company to thousands of employees and eventually a 2.8 billion sale. But we've got to start at the beginning because that's very fundamental to your story. Sometimes the worst is less overwhelmingly awful than we fear. Sometimes the right attitude can create good, even from life's most terrible situations. Without my being fully aware of what was going on or why, a large number of good-natured strangers took it upon themselves to save my life. It took me some years to digest this fact and its implications. Once I had, the simple resolution took deep root in my heart. I had to make mine a life that was worth saving.
I mean, this is very relative to my business life because the fact that I was a child refugee, which is what that quote refers to, means that I have resilience. And people remember entrepreneurs for our successes, but the thing that really distinguishes us is our ability to recover from failures. And I mean, all of us have many, and I recognize those. Looking back, there are things that I would do differently, but I don't sort of regret things because I know that all my life I have tried to do the very best I can. I prepare, I spend the time on it, I do the best I can, and therefore I don't look back and sort of say, I wish I'd done something else, I wish I'd done something else. I did the best I could at the time with the skills that I'd got. I'm not sure that I'm really the sort of person that you expect to be in business at all, because I'm much more socially oriented. And in fact, my life today, as in some sort of nominal retirement, is very much concerned with autism, which was my late son's condition. And that really takes me into schools, into hospitals, quite a different sort of environment to business. But they're not as different as you might think. When you're setting up, I've set up 3 charities and taken them to sustainability. Each of them is exactly the same as setting up a business, getting a steering group of trustees, startups, struggling with pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. The only difference is that you're doing feasibility studies, you're doing impact assessment. The difference is that the metrics that you're using are social, not financial. I noticed how in the business world, people are starting to talk about the second bottom line, which is the social bottom line, and even the third bottom line, which is the environmental, which I think is a real big step forward. I don't know whether medium-sized companies have started to do that yet, but certainly the big corporates are thinking of that, and they don't have a suggestions box. They have something that is ethics reporting mechanism or something like that to make sure that their brand is retained by all their business activities.
That's a perfect summary of exactly what we'll be talking about. And I just want to go back to that original kind of 5-year-old you who came over here on the Kindertransport.
When I think about it, I'm almost in tears. It's still emotional. It's still there.
And again, like we're all a mosaic of our experiences as we kind of grow. And I just, your story is just so beautiful. And the fact that you could barely speak English when you came over here, and you got taken in by the way that you talk about them in the book is absolutely fantastic, by auntie and uncle, your foster parents. And I mean, that kind of shaped your life. Something like that
absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, something like that almost couldn't have a massive effect on you. But I just really want you to kind of talk about, you figured out quite early on that education was kind of your way out and your way to kind of make something of yourself. So tell me a little bit about that.
Well, we came from a family that really respected education and were very intellectual. Auntie and uncle weren't. Uncle was a very practical soul, and he started off as an apprentice and then finished up as managing director of a medium-sized engineering company during the war. This was building Bailey bridges and stuff like that. I often think whether my interest in business stems from him, but I don't think it did. He never talked about it. When he was home, he was home. I went to his factory once. I can remember it clearly. I'm very proud of what he achieved there during the war. I think the business thing came as this campaign for women, that I was so discontented with the social environment that women had in the 1960s, that I set up the company really as an example, as an exemplar of what women could do, and was using a labour force that was in short supply, but actually was being ignored. The women with children who had left the industry on marriage or when their first child was expected. I'm an intellectual snob. I really, I desperately wanted to go to university, and it really wasn't possible. I needed to start earning money, and had a chip on my shoulder for a long time. But I do think education is social mobility. I'm not political, but I haven't liked what I've seen in England. I love this country with a passion that perhaps only someone who has lost their human rights can feel, but on the international stage, we don't look as strong as we did 10 years ago.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we'll come on to your business Freelance Programmers very shortly, but I want to kind of talk a little bit about your job at the Post Office Research Station in Dollis Hill. And I think that this kind of sums it up completely. The mechanical calculator on which I churned out my boring calculations was so basic, it hardly deserves to be called a precursor to the modern computer. Yet even I could sense intuitively that with sufficient brain power, this simple concept could evolve into an unimaginably powerful computing device. And again, for context, this is the early 50s,
yes,
or late 50s, early 60s. So tell us a little bit about that early kind of computing, and obviously all the way through to now, when we have in a world of AI and the advancements like that. Talk about those early days.
Well, a computer was an enormous thing. It was so unreliable that we used to measure the average free time between faults, where the computer was making a fault, and we had to sort of get our calculations done in the bits when it was working correctly. It was, well, we thought incredibly fast, but our schedules used to be based on 2 turnarounds on the computer a week. I mean, very, very slow compared to the seconds it is today. I used to get a stomachache every time I went on the computer because it cost £1 a minute, which is an enormous sum of money in those days with inflation. But once I fell in love with computing, basically, and there was no doubt about it. I was lucky because I'd wanted to be a mathematician, and I didn't have it in me to really succeed there. And computing came along, and I just fell in love with it. I adore it. It's great fun. It's so stimulating. It's you can use it for socially desirable things that I think are worthwhile, that are really worth doing, because most of us are struggling through our lives, and if we spend our time on trivia, we don't get the benefit of the education that we've had. And so I always advise people to sort of, if they're going into business, or do it big, think big, even if you start small, and really think of the long-term impact of what you're doing. So I'm a very serious businesswoman. I was one of the first women in the Institute of Directors in the days that they used to actually interview for memberships. I was very proud to be accepted. But they quizzed me on how I felt about corporate social responsibility, which was just coming in, and so on. It's great fun. I've thoroughly enjoyed my business life. I look back at it. I made some very good friends during that period, friends that last. And at my age, I'm very conscious that friends die off as well. I've lost 2 friends recently, or it seems like recently, and my husband. So, the relationships are so important.
And I want to go back to the start of that relationship, because it's one thing to fall in love with computing. It's another thing to go, you know what, I'm going to start a business. Oh, you know what, it's going to be in software, which just wasn't a thing then. I mean, you've got this great quote about it was something that people expected to be thrown in as almost like
Yes,
a manual in a
it was
car.
free.
Exactly. And keeping in mind that in the 60s, when you were doing this, you needed your husband's written permission to open a bank account. Women couldn't work on the stock exchange. They couldn't drive a car, a bus, or fly an airplane. And you just go ahead and go, you know what, I'm going to start this. Like, as far as your personality goes, when you reflect on a 29-year-old you who was like, you know what, I'm going to do this.
And at Dollis Hill, I'd been creeping around like a mouse, sort of dressing like an honorary man, and was very, very shy. But you eventually learn to have a facade that is a carapace in a sense, to protect your personality against the enormous pains, I think, of business. I do think it's hard. I do admire the young people coming up and starting businesses. They're very ambitious, hoping to sell in 2 or 3 years, whereas I was hoping to build an organization that gravitas and had long-term stability. And we lasted 45 years before we were taken over, which is quite a long time.
I also want to talk about this specific part. Obviously, you've got this workforce of women working from home, which again, like you said, now easy. That's something that happens all the time. But then it was completely alien almost as a concept. But there's another thing that you really struggled with in the fact that you were a woman. And there's a great part in this book where you say, but still my letters failed to produce a response until your husband, Derek, suggested that maybe the problem lay not with the letters themselves, with the signature at the bottom of them. And essentially, that's when Steve Shirley was born. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I had this double feminine of Stephanie and then Shirley being my marital name. And by signing Steve Shirley, the same sort of letters to the same sort of prospects began to get some response. And I began to get some meetings, and I had a good story to tell, and began to get some work. So it really made a difference. I've been Steve ever since. With the dameship, of which I'm enormously proud, Dame Steve doesn't sound quite right, but it's memorable.
That's for sure. I mean, did you get people almost giving you a double take when you met them in person? Yes. It was like, I wasn't expecting this.
Frisson of excitement as I walked through the door, and didn't quite know what to do about it. But I got used to that.
Yeah, I can imagine. And then as your business starts to grow, like you mentioned, there were a few choppy times, but as it started to grow, you write, running a company was a headache. Even after 2 short years, I was beginning to encounter the familiar paradox that at one stage or another demotivates most people who start businesses. I began to delegate much of what I loved about the business while filling my time with all sorts of administrative chores. Do you still have that same feeling when you reflect back on that? And if anyone's going through that,
it was
what would you kind of say?
A dreadful period in my life, really, because I knew it had to be done. Nobody else could do it. The insurance, the tax, the quarterly results, just no thank you very much.
How did you kind of reconcile that when you would, if you reflect back on that time?
I think if I'd had some more training, I would have been happier. But I literally, women in particular, we weren't taught anything about business. And I noticed the schools don't teach much about business either. You know, the basics of economics or how to budget, even your personal budgets is not taught in school, and that would be very valuable.
As far as business fundamentals, also, would you like to see that introduced into the school system?
I think a good introduction to business could well start at the school level. And would encourage entrepreneurism and business, which is what we're all talking about at the moment.
Because I mean, when you think back to you were very much a pioneer in women weren't expected to do this. You just went, I'm going to do this anyway. Yes. Do you think if you introduced it to people at a younger age to be like, you know, it's not just Jeff Bezos and, you know, Elon Musk that can do this. It's actually me. I can start this.
And certainly, Josh, there's been some work that shows that if you want more women into the science topics, you've got to start very early, catching them. It's about 7 or 8. If you leave it until they're in their teens, they think it's all nerdy. it doesn't work anymore. So it's another aspect of education. It changes values. But I'd like to say that all businesses need to be innovative, and it's one thing to learn what a business is supposed to be like, but each business has to be different. It has to be think big, but it actually has to have some kernel that is absolutely the unique selling proposition. It has to be different. It has to distinguish itself from the competition. And the qualities required in business are quite strange, and because they're financial. The one thing that I think is essential, absolutely essential, is the ability to deal with people. And although I'm not a popular leader, I can lead, and people come with me. It was when it got too big, and I was just so glad to get Hillary. I had a wonderful successor eventually, Hillary Cropper, and she absolutely made the business.
Mm. And again, people were at the core of your business, and they stuck by you. A lot of your employees in those early days, or the freelancers
Yes.
who you worked with. And you introduced the first profit sharing scheme in 1966. That's very early, but it also laid the foundations for what would become the co-ownership scheme that you had as you scaled the business. It got up to 25% of your company was owned by the employees. Why was that so important to you, even at those early days?
Josh, the staff had helped me through some very difficult periods during the 70s recession, and they had waited to be paid. They had attended conferences and represented my company without being paid at all, just for the sheer interest. And I felt that they deserved more than just payment for work done, but they should actually become co-owners with me. And I became quite passionate about this. It took me 11 years to make it happen, because not only the legislation insofar as it existed referred to salaried people, and of course most of my people were consultants, so we were outside the existing legislation. So again, there was an enormous sort of expenditure of time and money, and it was my money because it was my shares that were being negotiated. But I'm very proud of it. It's the biggest gift I've ever made. It's, I don't think, particularly appreciated. I mean, people say, yes, that's very nice, but they don't realize the hell I went through to make it happen.
I mean, the fact that you made more than 70 millionaires yourself, that's a testament, especially, it would be all over the news if someone did that now, let alone when you did it then.
Nobody does anything by themselves these days. I mean, it is all a matter of teamwork. And I built up very strong teams. I'm clever and I work extremely hard, but I surround myself with people who are really tip-top in what they do, and that makes all the difference.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what I really love is what you mentioned in the book about almost the benefits of what you don't know. We had a collective naivety too, which on balance worked out in our favor. Effectively, you were almost bribed, but you didn't realize that you were getting bribed, which is absolutely outstanding. But you leave it with, we were normal, decent people. No one told us that in business. Many people feel that normal rules of decent behavior don't apply. When you kind of look at those days and you compare it to kind of what the landscape is now,
they're very different.
Do you believe it's different?
The drive for very speedy returns and results. There's no feeling I get in the little companies that are starting up now that the ambitious ones want to grow into corporates. They want to make money. And that was very secondary. I had to make money in order to drive the business. I enjoyed business, but I wasn't a natural for it at all.
I now want to talk about 1963, when your son Giles was born. And it definitely... it sets you on this path later on that is just philanthropic, and we'll talk about the thriller philanthropic times shortly. But Giles was autistic, But I just love the way you talk about him in the book, where he's the most beautiful boy in the world. And it's just so beautiful. You can feel the warmth coming off the page. And, it's not easy. And you kind of discuss that. But you say by mid 1965, Giles had taken up weekly residence at the park while doctors there tried to work out what was wrong. This is early in the diagnosis, and it was a completely different time. Nothing I can write can capture the enormity of the sorrow that short sentence now brings flooding back to me.
Well, he was very small to leave home, and he was effectively leaving home Monday to Friday. That particular hospital came up with the prognosis that having lost speech, he would lose his other senses. The prognosis was so ghastly, I sort of said we wanted a second opinion even after 8.5 months in the hospital. So we went to Great Ormond Street Hospital, bless their cotton socks, their wonderful place. They used for the first time, it explained about autism and said that's what they thought he had, and it certainly fits it. I can see autistic characteristics in myself. I can certainly see autistic characteristics in my father. So it is known to be 80% genetic. We know now, we didn't then. At the time, the parents were blamed for not bringing up their children with sufficient love, which was quite hard to respond to when I think most parents of autistic children are pouring love into their child with very little return.
Caring for Giles, obviously you and Derek did it so beautifully together, but I mean, again, you kind of mentioned a holiday trip that you took where you were kind of the mother during the day, and then at night you'd stay up writing proposals, which took absolutely ages. And again, this was a very, very competitive time. I mean, you said, according to one study in 1974, there were 80 software companies in the UK and a mere 4,500 computers, which, I mean, again, it's so competitive that you're working in. But you also leave this absolutely beautiful note, which is, indeed, if I had to offer a single explanation for my company's survival and ultimate success, it would be this: my hard work.
Yes, I think so.
And every entrepreneur will know that kind of drive that you had. But how difficult was it when you were balancing your home life and that the
I think, Josh, the only time I forgot Giles was when I was working. So it was quite positive. The only time I forgot work, because I am a workaholic, which is unpopular these days, but the only time I forgot work was when I was with Giles. So the 2 6 began to really balance each other.
I want to now talk about dealing with difficulties. If we look at 1971, 72, it posted a loss. Your company, Pamela Woodman, left, who was your MD at the time, left to start a rival company. It's just hit after hit that you're taking. But this note I absolutely love is January 1973 saw a huge stock market crash. By 1975, UK inflation was touching 25%,
It was dreadful time.
Which in the doomsday of today at 5%, it seems very, very different world. But I love this note. If we relied on economic recovery to save us, we would have gone out of business. Tell me a little bit about that mindset. Was it almost a you against the world when you were building the company in the early days?
I think what drove me was that campaign for women. I knew that if we failed, not only had I failed, but people would say that women in general, we tried that once and it didn't work. We tried to film a woman's company, it didn't work. And I think that sort of my innate stubbornness, because I think that's another thing that entrepreneurs have. We are stubborn people, that we don't want to go down. We're just going to go down. If we do, we go down fighting.
There was another note that you had in the book where you ended up having a breakdown because of the pressures that you were having, and you put this note, which I just think is so vulnerable and so fantastic, and I really implore anyone to read the book. But it said, it wasn't the prospect of work itself that worries me. It was the feat of what people would be thinking. I used to be seen as superwoman. Surely now people will think of me as weak, damaged, a victim instead of a champion. The very fact having been proven to be vulnerable increased my vulnerability.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that.
When I started to sell, and I was the company's prime salesperson, I had a reasonable success. But then I had a consultant in who came with me on a couple of meetings, and he sort of said, I'm actually scaring the client. I'm so trying to show off my technical competence that I'm scaring the client, and I need to show my vulnerability. And I literally, what he suggested to me was that I drop my handbag on the floor and we have a little picking up all powder compacts and stuff like that. By the time you've done that, nobody's scared of you anymore. You're just a silly woman. And that sort of set the tone for some of the future things. So I believe in showing the vulnerability. Similarly, when I'm dealing with staff, I used to sort of say, let me show you how to do this. I know how to do it. I'll show you. Now I sort of say, I'm having difficulty with this. Can you help me with it? And people rise to the occasion and say, oh, Steve can't do it, but I think I can have a go at it. And that's, again, this vulnerability. The more you show, the more people show their vulnerability, and you begin to understand them.
And I think another thing that came out of that time was, I mean, the book itself is called Let It Go, but it was a kind of sign that you needed to step back from the business a little bit and let other people take it. And you mentioned Suzette Harold took over from you as MD. I brushed aside my insecurities and announced that Suzette would remain in day-to-day charge, and I took a less hands-on role. Within days, I was having second thoughts.
Yes.
Which, I mean, again, this is an experience that a lot of people will be going through because, you're the driving force behind it. And you even mentioned, but I stood by my decision and soon realized that this letting go was one of the smartest things I could have done.
Yeah.
But how difficult was that when you kind of came to that realization that, I need to step back?
It was unbelievably painful is the only expression I can use. It was just painful.
And how did you overcome that feeling of like, well, I would do it differently? You need to almost let them kind of take over and take charge of the business.
Absolutely kept quiet about it.
How difficult was it?
There were one or two staff I used to let my hair down to, but that's all.
Because she also had a very, very difficult or different style to you, didn't she? Because you were a lot more technical.
Yes.
And
Suzette I chose really for her ethics, for her technical competence. And she was a different sort of manager to me, but she was a manager. People did follow her.
And you also mentioned later on, after Alison Newell took over, you said, I need to stop thinking of it as my company.
Yeah, it's hard.
How difficult was that when you were doing that?
Well, first of all, I heard other people sort of talk about my company, and it's my company, and you just have to bite that back. But it's a stage you go through, and I'm glad now I'm through it, and I'm very proud of what they achieved.
The other very, very different thing, you've already mentioned Hilary Cropper, who took over, but you do mention that in the book, she wanted to kind of step away from the woman-led side of things. That was a specific focus, but it was something that was so key to what you built it as. Kind of take me back to your mindset when that was all going on, and how did you kind of reconcile getting over that?
In 2007, the company lost its soul, and the staff actually said that. That was when we had a male manager in. He really ruined the culture, but financially it was success. It's still part of Stopworth Stereo now, but it was financially a success. But emotionally and ethically, it lost its soul. And I think we talk about branding if we're sophisticated, but it is the culture of a company. What's the feel of it? What is it actually about? What is it for? What does it do? How does it fit into the world? And I was very proud of my company's Freelance Programmers position in the world. And it's extraordinary, sort of 60 years later. We had a reunion for 60 years. 88 people turned up from the early days, which is quite something after 60 years. So that it was quite special, and people are still writing about it, as you are. Thank you very much. Because it was different.
And I want to talk about kind of the power of a network, because I mean, now there's great membership organizations that kind of help. It's a peer-to-peer scheme to kind of help people kind of share problems, because it's a very lonely place being an entrepreneur and a founder and a CEO. People don't understand the struggles that you're going with. Did you kind of have that kind of support from a network in those days when you were growing the business?
I approached the local management centre and got one of their lecturers, I think he was a senior lecturer, to come and help me. And he finished up on the board and was an enormous help at the early days, and was doing basic teaching of me as to how to run the business and how to do the costing. Because I was the usual thing, each project ran profitably, but I was in losses, so like running out of cash.
Would you encourage people nowadays to kind of get involved with organizations such as that?
Oh,
with the
I think,
peer-to-peer?
I repeat, nobody does anything by themselves anymore. You've really got to work cooperatively. You've got to work with an open mind.
You also mentioned in the book, philanthropy, I think, will be one of the key mega trends of the next 50 years.
Yes. Business is becoming more socially oriented. I think I spoke before about the second bottom line. It's not just all finances, it is social impact as well. And the third bottom line being in the environment. So business is moving in that direction. But conversely, charities are moving to be much more business-like. In Prior's Court, for example, they have an artisan bakery which provides the bread and cakes and biscuits for the school, but it also sells them in Budgeons and other places, so that it's actually a working bakery. What does this do? It means that some of the training that the school does is paid for. It pays for itself, it actually contributes. And so the charity is becoming much, much more business-like. And I think there are other new structures which I'm not up to date on, but CICs, whatever they are, they seem to be businesses that have a social purpose. And I think Freelance Programmers would have been one of those. It was really driven by social purpose rather than money.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to finish. I've been throwing your own words at you. I'm gonna. This is my final bit of your own words to throw at you. The older I get, the clearer it becomes to me that empowerment is the key to business success, not the blind surrender of power and responsibility to whoever wants it. It is people, not assets, that make the modern business world go round.
And people always think in terms of buildings as the assets. But in fact, the buildings are just there to keep the rain off the real assets, which is the people. It's changed a lot, I think, over the years. We have these large monopolies at the moment. I mean, think what's happened with Thames Water, which is just in the news and is local, but speaking in Henley-on-Thames. It's almost disgraceful behaviour. Or it seems like it from the outside. I don't know any of the details, but it seems like disgraceful behaviour of a monopoly.
Dave, Stephanie Shirley, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Do you have any final words for our business leader audience today?
I think we've touched on most topics. I would like to go back to the ongoing need for women to be encouraged into the business world. My own activities have morphed from women to disability and now to diversity generally. And diversity is something that is very, very powerful for businesses today. Medium-sized businesses mustn't be all white, male youngsters. You need older people, you need black people, you need women, you need young people, you need a whole real mixture.